chapter 19 is another one of our parables that does not really have a nimshal, doesn't have an explanation. And the general approach is to use this parable as a discussion of the end of the kings of Yehuda. Now, there's debates which, you'll see, which thing is referring to which king or which leader, and they're a little bit fungible, a little bit flexible in terms of which one it works, but overall, this is about the end of the kingship of Judah. And so what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to parallel to some extent the prophecy or this mashal, this parable, to the actual story. So I wouldn't call it even a prophecy, because Yechezkel himself doesn't call it a prophecy; he calls it a lamentation. Right? This is basically a kina. The chapter begins and ends. Right? That this now take up lamentation, and then the chapter ends at the very end. Right? If it is a lamentation, it will be a lamentation at the very end. It's a pretty short chapter, but this is basically a kina to the end of the kingship of Judah. So says Yechezkel, "Vata sakina el nisi'ei Yisrael." So some of the Mefarshim point out. So it's interesting that he calls the kings of Israel Nisi'ei Yisrael, which is Nasi is normally a prince, but is normally kind of a single shevet, not quite a king. Maybe it's slightly an insult to to these end kings who have a much smaller, I would say, reach in terms of their impact. But he calls them Nisi'ei Yisrael. Ve'amarta ma imachal leviya bein arayos ravtza betoch kfirim ribsa gureha. So the first part of this parable, he describes a lioness of sorts crouching and raising her baby lions, and the Mefarshim struggle to figure out who the Lavi is. Who is the lioness? So Dr. Tova Genzel, so she argues that the lioness refers to a whole bunch of people, but basically it's the providers of power. So in some situations that was the Am Haaretz, right, who were the people who put up certain kings to be kings. In some cases it's going to be referring to Paro or Nebuchadnezzar, who put up certain kings to be, right, the king, so to speak, when they take over Yerushalayim and they depose whatever king is there and replace them with somebody else. So basically the lioness represents whoever is putting up the cubs, so to speak, to be the kings. It's not a particular person. In theory, right, you could have also said it was Yoshiyahu, because Yoshiyahu is the father or grandfather of basically all these end kings. Josiah was, right, the great king who does a lot of great things in his lifetime, and then is followed by a whole slew of his children and grandchildren who don't quite seem to meet the mark, with the possible exception of Yehoiachin, who is still sent into exile, but ends up being kind of the head of this diaspora Jewry that will eventually come back. So exactly where Yehoiachin fits in all this is also an interesting piece of the puzzle that the Rishonim debate. So if we keep on going, we start to realize certain particular people potentially. Latal echad migureha. So the lioness raises up one of her little ones, kfir haya vilmad litrof teref adam achal, and basically little lion grows up and now he can eat people. Okay, so if you jump backwards
High aspirations.
to 945, so So Yehoachaz, so chapter 23, verse 31. So Yehoachaz becomes king. Yehoachaz, the son of Yoshiyahu. And the first thing we're told is that he does evil in the eyes of Hashem. Right? Now he doesn't last very long, Yechezkel, but still, he's made king, doesn't last very long, and so he's the first of these lions, right? He's the first one who's raised up, and then what happens is, right, he does evil in the eyes of God. So Dr. Tova Genzel says that is, right, the eating people. Right, eating people equals, right, not doing good in the eyes of God. Okay, then the mashal continues. Vayishmeu elav goyim b'shachtam v'nitpas v'yaviu b'chachim el eretz Mitzrayim. So what happens? They hear, right, of his actions, and they catch him in their pit, whatever, and they put him in chains or hooks, and they bring him to Egypt. So, right after, Paranacho imprisoned him in Riblah, right, in the land of Hamas. So this is Pasuk 33. To prevent him from reigning in Yerushalayim, and he levied a fine upon the land, and 100 talents of silver. We're going to see in a second. So first he captures him. Then, right, Vatira ki nochala avda tikvata. So basically, right, so this is the catching and taking him down to Egypt. So that's what happens at this point in the story for Yechezkel. And then what happens? Parnacho takes Eliakim, his brother, and puts him in place, renames him Yehoakim. Right? So close to Yechezkel, right? But his brother Eliakim becomes Yehoakim and takes over. Okay? So Vatera ki nochala avda tikvata. So basically, from the perspective of the lines, this is a little bit hard to put this line into, right, arguing that the lioness represents all the different leaders, right? But the lioness saw that right, her hope was lost. Vatikachachad migureha kfir samatu. Right, so she basically takes a different lion cub and makes it into a lion. Right, and it also, so it roams amongst the lions, right? Because this lion isn't brought up from within Israel. This one is brought up by, right, Parnacho. So he's amongst the lions, so to speak. He's not just within the Jewish people. And he learns the same, right, bad behavior. So, and if you look at verse 37, right, so the very end of chapter 23, right, he's appointed, and he did evil in the eyes of Hashem, like everything his forefathers had done. Okay, so he also doesn't do very well. Now, there are some Mefarshim. So I prefer this reading, but there are some Mefarshim who say the second lion is actually referring to Yehoiachin, who is taken to Bavel. Mostly because they want to argue that the basically there's Yoachaz, Yoyakim, Yoyachin, Tzidkiyahu, and Gedaliah, right? So there's a couple of different players in this story, and you can kind of decide when you want to start this process and who you're actually referring to. More or less everyone agrees that Yoachaz is the one who goes down to Egypt, because that's pretty clear in the text. But in terms of being deposed, and the next one gets deposed by Bavel, so exactly which one you want to say, so it's a little bit more complicated. The problem is that if you want to say didn't do right in the eyes of God, so then, right, Yehoiakim is better than Yehoiachin. So there's a couple of different pieces. That's why I was saying before, this parable is less like one-to-one and is more about the overall demise of the kings of Yehuda at the end of Sefer Melachim. So we'll try to piece together the details and the nuances, but there are those debates because of the perfect connection and the lack of explanation in this mashal.
And there's not enough information about the timing of this prophecy to tie it.
I mean, it doesn't have any date.
Chronologically, yeah. Not in terms of where it falls and the rest of it, and
Right.
any belief that it's in order or anything like that.
Yeah, so it's meaning not in a way that's super particularly helpful. Also, the later that it is will only make it more unclear. Right? Meaning, if it happens before certain things, then you have to question: is this prophecy or is this? Because I said before, this is mostly a kina, so it sounds like this is about stuff that's already potentially taken place, maybe. But we've already seen prophecies about Tzidkiyahu before this in the book, so maybe you don't want to go as far as Gedalia, but you basically still have that free reign between Tzidkiyahu, Yoakim, Yoachin, and Yoachaz. So there's going to be built-in flexibility a little bit, either way. But it's a good question. Fine. So Pasuk Zayin, Vayida al menosav va'arehem hecheriv va'tesam eretz umlo'a mikol sha'agaso. So this also not easy to figure out what this is referring to, but it sounds like basically the second lion caused trouble amongst his neighbors and pillaged and attacked some of the people and raped the women. Doesn't seem like a very good guy, right? Took advantage of the people who were around him, and that is right. Goes hand in hand with growing up and learning to eat people, right? But who exactly it's referring to is not ideally clear. So Dr. Genzel, when she tries to argue that this is referring to battles with bands of Kazdim, which does take place somewhere here. But the problem is that with the battles of the Kazdim, it seems more focused on little attacks than it does. Right? This is like more this mashal is more descriptive than we have in our actual text of what's going on during the reign of Yehoiakim. So it's hard to know exactly what it's referring to. Right, so Yehoiakim, right, if I remember correctly, right, here it is in the beginning. So he becomes a vassal to Bavel in the beginning of chapter 24, and then the Chaldeans, right, troops of Aram, troops of Moab, and troops of Ammon, right, sent against Judah. Right, but the problem is that, right, so we don't know that there was ever the counterattack, so to speak, but it seems like from this mashal that at some point Yehoiakim must have attacked back against these people and committed certain, what today we would call war crimes, against some of these nations that had attacked him. Anyways, right, the part of the problem is with being that this is referring to Yehoiakim is that he dies, right, and Yehoiakim is replaced with Yehoiachin, right, and then, right, we don't get a third little kfir, we don't get a third little lion, right, but all of a sudden we now have what happens to the next lion, what happens to this second lion doesn't really match what happened to Yehoiakim. So, pasuk ches, vayitnu alav goyim saviv mimidiniot vayifresu alav rishtam b'shachtam nispas. So this is what we were just talking about. All the nations surrounding countries set themselves against him, right? So that's referring to most likely that war, even though. So either he instigates, and that's what causes the war. It's not clear from Malachi. We don't get, right. It's almost more clear. We get like more information from the mashal about what took place than we do from what took place, at least in the text. So that's why it's a little bit hard to match exactly what took place. And then you have pasuk tet vayitnu basagur bachachim vayiviuhu el melech Bavel yiviuhu bamitzodot lema'an lo yishma kolo od el harei Yisrael. And now, so who is this? So this is probably referring to Yehoiachin, but we didn't get a new lion. So that's why it's a little bit confusing, so that's why there's a debate. Some people want to say, oh, the second lion is referring to Yehoiachin, and maybe, but the matches so well with Yehoiakim first, and then it's just the end that doesn't really match. So some people wanted to insert that maybe Yehoiakim at the very end was before, right before he dies, he's actually brought to Bavel. Other people say, no, it's really just, it's a continuation. Really, there should have been a third lion. Okay, it should have been, that was Yehoiachin, and that caused, right, that he's the one who ends up going into. So it's a little bit murky exactly how to read this piece of the mashal. Some also point out that if this is referring to Yehoiakim, at least, right, those who point out that it's referring to Yehoiakim also point out that as opposed to the first lion who's only brought out with hooks, this one also has a sagur, which is like a collar. So they argue that Yehoiakim became more of a warrior in terms of some of the things that he had to do. So he required more, meaning they needed more security, so to speak, when they were removing him, as opposed to the first guy who hadn't been king for very long and didn't quite establish himself in the same way, that hooks were enough. And his voice, his roar is no longer heard in Israel. So again, if it's referring to Yehoiachin, so we said Yehoiachin is about going to bring the people back. So what do you mean never? So that's why it's better with Yehoiakim, right? The first guy. So basically, there's all these details that the Rishonim try to turn over in terms of trying to figure out, because the mashal doesn't have an imshal, doesn't have, right, what the parable means. So they're all trying to figure out what every word and every detail, and they're going back and they're doing this the whole time. They're like, maybe this, right? This is what they're doing. And they're trying to figure out, well, who's it referring to exactly, who's it referring to, what's the detail. So I'm going to leave that gray in there, but I think if you just take it as the demise of all of the Judean kings towards the end, and it's not perfect one-to-one, but it's about kind of the theme of what's going on, I think that you get the picture, and the message is clear. Now the parable continues but shifts. So imcha kagefen, so biddamecha al mayim shisula poriyav anefa heita mimayim rabim. So this is actually a parable that we had a little bit earlier, referring to the Jewish people. Here it's referring to the leadership, right? So you were likened to one whose mother was a vine planted by waters and was fruitful, full branched, and abundant waters. So basically, a vine that was set up for success, right? And most people say this is referring to Tzidkiyahu now, okay? So Tzidkiyahu was propped up by Bavel, right? After Yehoiachin is brought into exile, Tzidkiyahu is put in his place. He's renamed Tzidkiyahu. He becomes, right, he's the grandson of Yoshiyahu. He is really, in many ways, someone who Bavel hopes to maintain a relationship with, and that is, to some extent, right, he's set up for success. He's got a huge ally backing him. Ve'yula matot oz el shivtei moshlim v'tigba kumatot al bein avosim va'ira begavho v'rov diliosav. And a vine is actually a really interesting image here, because a vine is not a particularly strong plant, but what vines can do is they can basically wrap themselves around a much stronger tree, right, and get to the top, so to speak. So that's what's kind of being described here, right? It has strong rods for scepters of sovereigns, and its stature grew among the high and tallest branches and became visible by its heights and by its many tendrils, right? So basically, because of its relationship with Bavel, so Tzidkiyahu was able to really build to some extent while he's king. Vatutash. They skipped the line. Yeah. Pasuk Yud Beis. Vatutash bechema la'aretz hushlacha v'ruach kadim. No. Yeah. Vatutash bechema la'aretz hushlacha v'ruach hakadim hovish pirya hisparku v'yaveshu matei uza esh achalsu. So then things don't go so well. So all of a sudden it gets right. So, and this is because again Tzidkiyahu ends up rebelling against Bavel, and that causes great anger. He's thrown down, and an eastern wind comes and dries out its vegetation, and it is devoured by fire. So this is most likely referring to, right? So here also, right? You could say, is this referring to Gedaliah, the end, the total, or you could say the kingship, right? The kingship is cut down, and the kingship no longer, because Gedaliah is only going to be a prince, like a nasi, which is kind of that irony of that beginning, right? But this is the end of the kingship, with the end of Tzidkiyahu. Now, Dr. Tova Genzel raises a question. She just points out it's very interesting that so many of the prophecies and the parables in this book are very God-centric, right? You get a lot of God saying stuff and God being the angry party, and in the mashal, God's represented some way or another. In this kina, like, there's no God. It's a little bit interesting, right? Like, you don't have any mention of God in the whole chapter, basically. So, I think her question is better than, right, any answer. I haven't seen any great answers, but she suggests something interesting. She suggests that to some extent, right, God's in exile, meaning there's a notion that when we go into exile, God goes into exile, and so in this whole unfolding, in the same way that Akina is all about that exile, so what's being highlighted here by the lack of God is that God's almost no longer present. Mm. And then she says, in very similar vein to the Purim story, that even though God doesn't seem to be there, God's always kind of there, and the way that God perhaps is being represented here. And she argues might be represented in other places as well, is the eastern wind, right? That the cause of this destruction was, to some extent, the drying up of everything was caused by the eastern wind, right? Ruach hakadim. So I just want to find some of her other references. So there was, if you want to just jump around. So the first is a couple in Shemot. So Shemot Yud Gimel, so 10:13. On page 159. So this is referring to the locusts. This is the plague of the locusts. Vayit Moshe es Mateo al Eretz Mitzrayim, v'Adonai nihag ruach kadim ba'aretz kol hayom hahu v'chol halayla haboker haya b'ruach hakadim nasa es harbeh. Right, so here very clearly God is the one who's bringing the eastern winds to bring the locusts, right, to Egypt. Similarly, if you jump a couple chapters later to chapter 14, verse 21. So page 168. This is at Yam Suf, right before Az Yashir. Vayit Moshe et yado al Yam, v'yolech Hashem es Hayam beruach kadim azah kol halayla, v'yasem es Hayam lecharava, v'yevavku hamayim. Right, so the splitting of the sea is brought upon by God bringing the strong eastern wind again. Right. Similarly, you have now we're going to jump in Yirmiyahu. So, Yirmiyahu chapter 18, verse 17. So right before Yechezkel. So on page 1115. Kiruach kadim afitzim lifnei oyev oref velo panim ereim bayom edam. Like an east wind I shall shatter them before the enemy, the back of my neck and not my face will I show them on the day of their calamity. Right, again, clearly referring to God basically destroying through, right, this process of being this eastern wind. And
would the eastern wind be because that wind came from desert land and sort of dries out everything because it's very dry air or something?
meaning that definitely could be, in terms of the arid climate of the Middle East, that definitely could be part of what it, meaning why that is the choice of words. My point is only that, or Dr. Genzel's point is that if you look at the eastern wind showing up throughout Tanakh, very often it's almost like, it's like God's, how we feel God's wrath in some ways, or God's presence, right, in the splitting of the sea, right, meaning it's some way that, like, us human beings, it's like, I don't know, it's a little bit like you're feeling God's presence, but it's not God, clearly, but it's a representation a little bit. And so perhaps in this Kina, which doesn't really have God, Dr. Genzel is arguing, well, maybe the Ruach Kadim is almost like the sprinkling Yechezkel is putting in there of, right, the godly input into this process. And just to round out, I'll just show you quickly three more, because why not? So Yonah, chapter 4, towards the end of the book of Jonah. So this is in the Treyasar. So you have to kind of find exactly where it is. There it is. Page 1375. Verse 8. Vayhi kizrach Hashemech vayiman Elokim ruach kadim charishis v'tach Hashemesh al rosh Yonah. Right, so he brought this right, God appointed a eastern wind to basically
Did you say verse 8?
Yeah, verse 8.
Chapter 4. Oh.
And it was then 1375, yep. And this causes him to, right, his kikayon basically dies, his shade dies, and he's now at the mercy of the sun, causing him to faint. And the end of the story, a little bit of a strange end of the story. Again, God brings this eastern wind in Tehillim 48:8. So this is on page 1476. Beruach kadim tishaber aniyos Tarshish. Right? With east wind you smash the ships of Tarshish. Again, clearly referring to God using the eastern wind as his hammer. And lastly, in Hosea. So let's go back, actually. I should have probably done that earlier. Hosea is the beginning of the Treyasar. Chapter 13, verse 15. Starts in the bottom of 1347, goes into 1348. For though he flourishes among the marshes, an east wind will come, a wind of Hashem ascending from the wilderness, and his fountainhead will become parched, and his spring will dry up, etc., etc. Okay? So, it's interesting, in almost every other occurrence, it's called, like, God is mentioned in the context of, right, the eastern wind. In our context, there's no mention of God, but Dr. Genzel said that's basically the point, right, that in this moment of the demise of the kings of Judah, in this moment of feeling like everything's gone to nothing, God is the Hester Panim, right, the closed off, and the fact that God is going into exile, with us, is almost like God's not there anymore. And there's only a reference to God in the eastern wind if you take all of Tanakh and kind of plug that into what's going on here. So I thought that was an interesting point. Fine. So, now I'm in Yirmiyahu. There we go. So let's finish this up. V'atashisulah b'midbar, the eretz tziyah v'tzama, and so now you're basically in a parched desert situation. V'titzei eish mimate v'adeha pirya ochla v'lo haya ba mate oz shevet limshol kina hi v'atehila kina. Right, and the fire went forth from the rod of its branches and devoured its fruit. It no longer had in it a strong rod, a scepter to rule, because since it rebelled against Bavel, what had made it strong, and originally, right, being able to wrap around that strong tree of Bavel, no longer had, and now it was basically utterly destroyed, and this is an utter lamentation, right? This is a kina of Yechezkel to the end of the kingdom of Judah. So again, whether it's referring exactly to Yehoiakim, to Yoyachin, to Tzidkiyahu, to Gedaliah, or to combinations of them, I think doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, it's really a story about the end of the kingship of Judah, and some of what, again, Yechezkel is trying to convey to his people in Babel, in terms of what's going on there, and the ultimate loss, and hopefully to get through to them that it's up to you guys, right? And this is a common theme, right? We have a couple of themes, right? The theme of you get punished for what you do, not for your parents do. The theme of, right, the sins of Tzidkiyahu and the demise of what's going on over there, and you don't believe it, but it's happening. And as much as you don't believe it, it's coming down the pike, and it's going to be there any second. And these are kind of he keeps on going back and forth, and the use of metaphor is ubiquitous in the book, right? And so this is a very Yechezkel chapter, and another one rung in our process of trying to understand him better and the reality of the Jewish people at this time. So we'll pick up with chapter 20 next week.
What's the upcoming schedule?